Hello, I'm Lizelle Sambry, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things traditional publishing, writing, and a little bit of reading. And today I'm going to do a Q&A. I haven't done one of these in a bit, so I figured I would get to going on one. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions on the YouTube community tab and also on Instagram. I'm not able to get to all of them, unfortunately, just so I could kind of keep this video a reasonable length, but I did try and combine some together because sometimes people were asking something that was like pretty similar, and so I tried to combine things together so I could kind of hit on multiple things for multiple people. So hopefully this video is helpful or interesting or whatever it is that you want to get from a Q&A. I've separated these into publishing questions, writing craft questions, and then kind of like for fun questions, which are basically questions that didn't really fit into those categories. And I have timestamps below if you want to skip around. But with all of that said, let's go ahead and get started. So the first publishing question is, was publishing all that I hoped it would be? So really, the answer to this is kind of yes and no. So for me, even when I learned more about traditional publishing and how the process worked, I didn't really know what I expected of it in some ways. And I think really my baseline expectation of what I wanted from traditional publishing was to have my book published. And for pretty much a very long time, that was my basis of what I wanted, was for the book to be published. And that was kind of what I was hoping I would get out of the experience. And that is what I did get out of the experience. So thumbs up. But of course, I, like many people, would have loved if I was, this shiny unicorn and I came out the gate swinging and I was a huge bestseller and I had a bunch of special editions and I got a giant advance and stuff like that. And of course that is not actually what happened, but to me that's a standard experience. Most people are not going to have that experience. And so I guess in that way, technically no, but also yes. I feel for the most part, I just really spent most of my time wanting to get into publishing to publish a book. And that's what I did. And I've been able to continue doing that. And so that's really what I had hoped for. So I guess I did get what I hoped for out of traditional publishing. This actually kind of leads really well into the next question, which was, what surprised you the most about the publishing industry? And I think this is probably what became more apt of my whole publishing experience, is that I just didn't know a lot of things. And throughout the process, I learned a lot of things. But I think what most surprised me, I suppose, about the industry was kind of seeing the way that some publishers will invest money-wise, but then not invest in the book other than that. And I've always found that was something I found really surprising and confusing. I think because it seems to defy business logic in that there are some publishers that will pay a very large advance for a book and then not market it, which I find very astounding and confusing, because why would you invest all that money and then not follow through to make the book a success? I don't understand that. I continue to not understand that. And certainly not all publishers do that. I got a very modest advance for my book, and I got great marketing for it for Blood Like Magic and Blood Like Fate I'm discussing specifically. And so I think that's something that I found very surprising about the industry, because it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. How can you find a good / reputable literary agent? So this is actually a really interesting question. I feel for a long time, I answered this question in pretty much the same way, but now I really think I have an additional perspective on it. But that is to say, for me, at baseline, what I kind of say about finding a reputable literary agent is to first and foremost kind of look at their agency. So see if their agency is reputable. And by this, I mean they're reputable for you in a way, in that they are selling the books that you want to sell as an agency. So if you write fantasy books. You look up the agency, you can see that the agency is selling fantasy and they're doing well at that. And so an agent that is part of that agency, then you can look at that agent individually and be like, are they selling books? Are they selling projects? Some agents may be new, and that's absolutely fine. If they're part of a reputable agency that is selling what you want to sell, they are likely getting mentorship from people in that agency. And so that is kind of the two things I look at. I look at the agency first, and then I look at the individual agent. It's great if they have sales, especially if they have sales in what you are trying to sell, because it shows, some sort of, I guess, proof of concept in a way that they can sell that. But again, you might have new agents that might have not sold those things yet, and that's totally fine. As long as they're in a good agency, they're going to get good mentorship and they'll be able to do that in the future. Presumably, hopefully. And so those are like the two main things that I would look at, in terms of like wanting to find an agent that is not going to turn out to be a schmagent and do all of this stuff. Hopefully. So this is where the kind of like add-on caveats start to come in, because this isn't really foolproof. And I think when I was querying, I felt that that was like a pretty foolproof method. I felt that that was a strong method for finding a good reputable agent. But I think things cannot necessarily be that way, because there are some agencies that do really well and sell lots of books that then later you kind of find out that they were treating some clients not really well and then treating other clients really well. And so then even asking around for people's experiences was really difficult, because some people were having a great experience and some people were getting a very, very poor experience, which is why usually, like, if you get to the call stage with an agent, this is why people suggest to kind of ask to speak to a client who has not sold a book yet. That is something I recommend to say specifically. So not asking just for any client, because of course they're going to send you to a great client. But asking for someone who hasn't sold, because that can be a client that is not necessarily going to be getting the superstar treatment yet, if they're the sort of agent that is treating people differently based on whether they've sold books or not. So if someone who they haven't sold a book for is having a good experience, then I find that to be a positive sign. But again, these are all things that you try your best to kind of mitigate and to get a good reputable agent. But having a good reputable agent also doesn't mean that they're going to be the right agent for you, because there are good reputable agents that people just don't mesh well with. Sometimes people want a lot of communication from an agent. They want to hear from them a lot. They want to do regular check-ins, or they want an agent that's very editorial that goes through their work with them. And you might have a good reputable agent that just isn't very editorial. They don't want to go through your work like that. They just want you to edit it and you to get beta readers, and like they'll kind of make small suggestions and then you'll go on submission. Or they might be a good reputable agent that doesn't want to do those things, doesn't want to do those regular check-ins, or just doesn't have time to do it. They might be like, I have a lot of clients. I can't meet with you or have an email with you every week or every month, etc. I can kind of only communicate with you on a need to know basis. And so I think that's something to really keep in mind with this whole thing of finding an agent. Like, you do your best to find an agent that works well for you, but sometimes that doesn't work out. And that's also okay. Because, and this is something I learned more as I got into the industry, a lot of people are not with their first agent. A lot of authors have had multiple agents throughout their career. And all of those agents might have been good and reputable. It's just that agent didn't quite click for them or didn't quite work for them. And so they moved on to a different agent. And so that's kind of my additional add-on that I have now. I would suggest, again, that sort of, agency, checking out the agency and checking out the agent and checking out that they're selling what you are wanting to sell. Because of course, if you get into an agency and kind of you want to sell fantasy and everyone's just selling romance, that might not be the agency for you, even if they're a good, reputable agency that is selling things. So that's kind of my whole circle on the literary agent discussion. So, do your best due diligence as you can. I also recommend kind of just Googling an agent to see if there's anything floating around on the internet that people have been saying about that particular agent, and just kind of see how that goes. This is the sort of search in which you do the best you can to find the best reputable agent that you hope will work well with you, and then you kind of try it out. But if in that process you find that that is not the best agent for you, don't feel like you've done something wrong in that process. It's just that agent doesn't work for you. And a lot of authors find that out about themselves and their agent and switch to different agents. And now we're on to the writing craft section of the questions. So how do you outline / plan your books? So I will say kind of two things, and they're kind of software style related, but also structure related. So the way that I structure my books is I use the Save the Cat story structure. I will link down below the book that I read, which is Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I will also link down below. I've been doing a series on my channel in which I break down how I interpret / use each of the Save the Cat beats in my own writing. And so I do talk about that very much at a length, which goes very much into how I outline. And so I will link that series down below as well so that you can check that out. So I use that story structure. And then basically on top of that story structure, I use a program called Plottr. I will also link a video down below in which I do a review on it. Since then, Plottr has added a lot more features. I've been using it in different ways. And so I've kind of consistently added on to that process, but that's at least a good baseline understanding of Plottr and kind of how I use it to outline, using the example of my 2024 book, Tender Beasts. And so essentially what Plottr is it allows you to have different rows and layers, and within those you can put kind of scene cards and plan chapters. And so essentially what I do is I use the story structure of Save the Cat as one layer, and then below that I plan all of my chapters, and then underneath those I add different layers for different things that I want to include in my story. And so I did a whole workshop with the Fold called how to do layered plotting. They have it on their YouTube channel. They were supposed to have it for a limited amount of time, so I'm not sure how long it's going to be up, but I will link it anyway, and so it may still be included there. I may, after I do my Save the Cat series, do a kind of layered plotting series to get into this a little bit more. I don't want to do one big video because that workshop was very tiring for me. So I might kind of break it down into parts on YouTube, and then I can kind of expand on certain sections. But essentially, those different layers that I'm doing is I just create a single layer for each kind of story aspect that I want to focus on, and making that layer just kind of lets me focus on it completely. So I'll have layers for character arcs, and so I will use that to plan out a single character's entire character arc over each chapter, and that makes it easier for me to kind of drop hints to be like, okay, this is this full character's character arc. So say I know there's a chapter where they're going to, get into trouble and they're going to have to fight someone. Then on that character's character arc level, if there's anything in that fight directly related to their arc as a character, I will write that down in their little character arc section, and I'll write down whatever needs to happen there. So say they're like really cowardly and they need to become braver. So then I might write down runs away during the fight, feels really badly about it. Everyone kind of blames or gets mad at them, increases their feelings of guilt, something like that. And so the main kind of chapter will just be like, these people get into a fight and this happens, very plot focused. And then that character arc thing, I'll call out that thing for that specific character's arc. And so that way, when I go to write the actual chapter, I have everything that's going to happen in the plot. I have the things I need to add for that character's arc, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth, whatever kind of applies in that layer. And so, yeah, I'll do layers for character arcs. I do layers for red herrings. I do layers sometimes for twists so that I can put in hints along the way of like things that I need to drop so that the reader can eventually understand why this twist has come about. Secret things that, like, if a reader's really paying attention, they'll like figure it out. I do layers sometimes for like magic system things or technology things. I also have done layers for subplots. I do my layers for subplots so that I can plan out my subplot in its own sort of silo. And so essentially what this whole plotting style is doing, it is allowing me to plan out different sections of my book in their own individual silo, which really helps me focus on it and make sure that I'm hitting everything I need to hit in that moment. And then I take that silo of information and I add it on to the greater whole. And so all those different individual silos, when I go to draft, basically everything that falls under chapter 1 in all those different silos, the program compiles that into one section for me so I can see all of that information at once. And so whenever I'm drafting a chapter, I am seeing what needs to happen plot-wise, what needs to happen character arc-wise, what needs to happen red herring-wise, what needs to happen if there's a twist, what needs to happen for subplots, what needs to happen for a love interest or a romantic interest, what needs to happen if I need some sort of magic system thing explained in that chapter. Basically, like, sometimes 8, 10 different things that need to happen in a single chapter in order to pull together all the layers of the story. And which for me is something I build up over time when I'm plotting. And so it's not super overwhelming, but I can understand how putting that all together and planning that much could be really overwhelming to people. But the great thing about, me using that system is that it's quite flexible. Like, I could not plan that much if I wanted. And in the past, I have planned a little bit less. In the past, I haven't done the character arc thing. That's something I started doing later when I would write out the story, I would wish that I had put in a character arc thing. So I do a very large and extensive amount of plotting for my stories. You do not have to do that. This is just something that I choose to do because I find it helps me create very, very solid drafts. I also really appreciate it with doing that particular style because if, for example, somebody beta reads my book and they're like, I thought this twist came out of nowhere. Then I can go back to my plotting. I can go back to that specific layer where I laid out all of those clues for that twist. And I can say, okay, these are too subtle. These are way too subtle because the reader couldn't even be like, oh, that's why X happened and X happened and X happened to understand the twist. They felt like it really came out of nowhere. So then I have pinpoint markers of exactly which chapters I was dropping these hints and what the hint was. So I can go back and I can be like, okay, this needs to be bigger. I need to edit that. And that really helps me also in the revision process, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more because there is a question about revision. But so that is essentially how I plot the stories. I recommend checking out that layered plotting video because it is very extensive. It's an hour workshop. And even in then, I really could only kind of like get through things pretty quickly. But that is essentially how I plot. I use the Save the Cat story structure, and then I use a layered plotting style in which I kind of break down every aspect of the book into its own section and work on it individually and then slowly weave it into the whole. How do you edit your books / organize your revisions? So I talked about this a little bit when I talked about plotting out my books. And so my revision process is similar in a way. So what I do is that I reread over the whole book. So I read through the entire thing. I haven't always done this, but I really, in most recent amount of time, have discovered this is really the best way for me to like do this revision process. So I reread through the whole book. While I am rereading through the whole book, I make a summary of the chapter because sometimes what I plotted out and what I end up writing for the chapter can become different. And so I want to know what is happening in every single chapter, really so that I don't have to reread it again later, that I can just kind of read through, or I can pick which chapters I want to edit. I will have to reread through it later, but this makes me feel better about it because at least when I'm revising and I'm doing all of that, I can know this is exactly what's in each chapter. So I make a summary of what's happening in the chapter. I make note of the date, things like that. And then I will write down revision notes. So whatever kind of comes to mind to me at that moment to change in that chapter. And so that's what I do when I read through the book. And then after that, I kind of just have things in my head that I know need to be better about the book. And I basically kind of create a to-do list about all of those things. So in my kind of is this the most recent thing I've worked on? Yes. The most recent thing I worked on, which was the Couples Retreat, which is an adult thriller that I'm working on. I knew that probably one of the characters I was going to cut. And I knew that I felt like I needed a little bit more information about the other characters that were in the book. I felt that maybe my twist wasn't as well thought out as I wanted it to be. And so that was kind of something I also needed to do. And so essentially what I do at that point is I go back to my plotter file that I've created where I have all my different layers and silos of things, and I will delete things and add things. So if there's a character and I felt like the character wasn't really fleshed out, I will go to their little character arc silo. I'll read back through it and I will add to it. So I'll add more bits and pieces so that I can feel like the character is more fleshed out. And so I already have my baseline that I wrote based on, and I'm basically just going and editing that specific silo. Same with if I thought a red herring was kind of weak, for example, I'll go back to my little note thing and I'll find the silo that was the red herring for that, and I will go and I will edit that. And so essentially, before I am even actually editing the book, I am going back and I am editing all the plotting that I've done and all the outline I've done, so that I essentially have a new outline for the revision. And so that's basically what I end up with in the end. Sometimes I add chapters, I take chapters away, I do things like that. But for the most part, I'm essentially creating a brand new outline, and then I take that new outline and I use that to revise. And so I set myself a schedule, because I always set myself a schedule of this is how many chapters I'm going to revise today. Usually I do 3. I try and do a maximum of 3 because any more I find to be a lot. And then I just look at my new outline. And so there's a bunch of things that are going to be in there. I don't really mark necessarily where I've made a change or not made a change, but I know everything that happens in the chapter because of the summary. And so I will just go in and I will look at everything that's supposed to happen in the chapter, and I will edit the chapter to make sure that what I have in the chapter matches the outline, because the outline is what I'm using to guide my revisions. And that is how I revise and edit my books currently. This one is advice for finishing a book / getting past the first draft. So I will share my advice for it. I will share it with the understanding that this advice will perhaps be things that people don't want to do. But this is what works really well for me. And that was the reason that I could finish a book, and is the reason I can continue to finish books. And so what I do first is that I schedule myself out. So this means I usually will say these days, this amount of time, I'm going to write a chapter a day, or I'm going to write 2,000 words a day. You don't have to write that much. It's whatever amount you want to do, however much you want to do per week. Say you want to write, I don't write every day myself, so I wouldn't recommend it, but if you want to write every day, if you want to write 3 days out of the week, if you want to write 2 days out of the week, and choose whatever amount of words you want to do. If you want to write 500 words, you want to write 1,000 words, you want to write 250 words, whatever that schedule it is, and keep it consistent. Keep it consistent. I do little check marks that I can check off because it makes me feel good. You can use I know Scrivener has kind of a built-in word tracker thing. And so whatever schedule you make, just keep it consistent, even if it's 1 day a week. And then the second rule for myself is I don't go back and edit. I just keep drafting. And I keep drafting if I think it's bad. I keep drafting if something doesn't quite make sense yet. I keep drafting if I'm like, oh, this thing that I did 3 chapters ago is going to have to change so that I can do this new thing in this chapter. I just write the chapter as if I've made the change and I do the new thing. And I continue that way. I think when you get further along and you've kind of written a few books, you can like give yourself some leeway and you can go back and do things. But for the strictness of like, I need to finish a book and I need to try and finish this first draft, I wouldn't go back and change things. I would say that for editing, because editing comes after. But if you don't have a book, you can't edit anything. And if you continuously edit before you're finished, it will make it very difficult for you to finish, because you will get stuck in a loop of revising and going back and revising and going back when you can finish the first draft and then you can look at it as a whole and then revise it later. And I find for myself, a lot of the time, when I'm writing a first draft, I think it's really, really terrible. And when I take a break from it and then I go back and read it in the revision process, it is always nowhere near as bad as I thought it was. So I think that can also kind of skew with things. But those are kind of like my 2 main tips for if you're struggling to finish a first draft, for finishing a first draft, is to set yourself a schedule and keep to it. And the second is to not go back and revise. Because if you are doing those 2 things, you will eventually finish a book. You just will. Even if you only write once a week and you write 200 words, if you do that consistently, you will eventually write a book. It might take you a very long time, but you will eventually do it, especially if you don't go back and revise, because you will spend all of that time creating and adding new words. And so if you want to, if 1 week you have a bunch of time and you want to do more writing, that's totally cool, as long as you always do your baseline schedule and you keep to that. And that's really my advice for that. Again, I know that is not the favorite of everyone. I know sometimes people will have difficulty keeping a schedule. And so those sorts of things happen, and I totally understand that, but this is just what has worked for me. And so this is the only thing I can kind of really give advice on. And so I unfortunately can't really give advice on a method that is different than this, because I've never done that. The way that I've finished books has always been that I've scheduled myself out time, and I have scheduled myself goals for what I do during that time, and I have done them. And that's kind of how I finished. Now we're on to the fun questions. Mind you, all questions are fun, but like, you know what I mean? Questions I couldn't fit into another category. And the first one is, if you had time to write in a new category you haven't published before, what would it be? I mean, I would love to do a graphic novel. I would love to do a graphic novel. I would really, really love to do a graphic novel. Yeah, I have a ton of interest in them. I've been reading a lot of graphic novels. I definitely have some like back of mind brewing plans that I don't have time for it now, but if I had time for it, I would 100% want to do a graphic novel. But in terms of genre, that's a little bit harder, because I feel like I've published in all the genres I'm interested in writing because of doing genre blends. So fantasy, sci-fi, horror, and thriller, like those are really all of the genres I'm interested in writing in. So I struggle to think of a genre I haven't published in that I would want to do, because I don't see myself writing something that isn't fantasy, sci-fi, horror, or thriller. Yeah, that's really rough. Maybe historical, but I kind of feel like I'm not, this is perhaps bad to say, I kind of feel like I'm not like smart enough to do historical. Like, I don't know that I'm good enough at like researching. And I think I'm good enough at researching that like I can research for a book, but I don't know that I could research for historical, knowing that because it's historical, people are going to pay a lot of attention to whether I'm historically accurate about stuff. Like, I feel like that would stress me out. But I think I'd have some interest in historicals, but also like, then am I supposed to, like, if they have a certain dialect, I have to write in that dialect. And like, I think that would just be really difficult and stressful. I don't think I'd be interested in any memoir, and I don't think my life has been interesting enough for like memoir or anything like that. Essays, I also feel like I'm not smart enough. I think climate fiction is kind of interesting, but I haven't really read a lot, and I also think I'm not smart enough to do that. So I really don't know that there's a genre, and I wouldn't want to do romance. And I wouldn't want to do like Western. Yeah, I don't really think there's a genre that I haven't published in that I would do in the future. Who is your favorite character you've ever written? I don't have favorites. I don't play favorites. They all have their own different kind of strengths. But I think I will say a character that I found, like, I really enjoyed the process of writing that character. And I would say that's Sunny, who's the main character of Tender Beasts, which is my young adult psychological thriller / horror coming out next year in 2024. And I really enjoyed writing her because how she presents herself as a person is very different from how she is internally. Whereas I think like Voya from Blood Like Magic, Blood Like Fate, she's like pretty much what you see is what you get. Like, she's pretty well there. Like, certainly she like holds some things in, but for the most part, like, her internal and her external dialogue is pretty well the same. And I think Daisy from Delicious Monsters, also she like holds back a lot of things and she has a lot of secrets and that sort of thing. But again, her inside and outside is like very similar. Like, she's kind of like cynical in a way, and she presents herself in that way. She's like standoffish, and she's like, that's how she is. And so I feel like she's pretty much like what you see is what you get in that way. Where Sunny is very different. She is externally very like happy-go-lucky, kind of positive, just like a ray of sunshine. And internally, she is not that at all. Yeah. So I found it to be like, for me, a really enjoyable process to write that sort of character. And the final for fun question, which of your current works would you love to see adapted for the screen and why? So for this, I'm going to pick the Blood-like duology series. I would love to see any of my works adapted. Of course I would. But I would really love to see the Blood-like duology. I think that would be so fun to see like a show or a movie like set in Toronto, like a magical future Toronto. I just think that would be so fun to see on screen, and like to see all the different like family members come together, and to see them all represented. I just think that would be really fun. And of course I would love that. But again, I would love to see all my works adapted. But I think for some, I'm like, I don't really know how you would do Delicious Monsters. Like, I would need someone to tell me how they saw that being done. Cause I just don't really know how it would be done without it kind of in like a way that like isn't like, doesn't come off weird and campy. Like, I don't really know. But I would love to see it. I'd love someone to show me how they're going to do it. I also think Tender Beast, I know that one isn't out yet, so none of you have read it. But I think that one would be really fun adapted as like a movie too. But anyway, I think any of those would be fun. But because I know how the whole publishing thing works, I know that it is very rare to get your stuff adapted. So I just kind of like, yeah, that would be cool and fun. I think that would, but I think, you know, the Blood-like duology would be the one that would be like the most fun to see on screen with all the magic and stuff. And that's it for the Q&A. I hope that was enjoyable for you, or like the answers helped you out. Sorry again that I couldn't get to every question, but I hope that was kind of enough to help you out. Some of those writing craft questions I will probably extend into a larger video just because they came up multiple times. So yeah, I'll probably do something about that plotting style. I might do a series after I do the Save the Cat series. And I might do kind of after that, kind of a one-off revision video, because doing the revision video will kind of depend on sharing how I do the plotter stuff. I have a lot of those kind of craft videos I'd like to do. I'd also like to do kind of an updated plotter review, that sort of thing. But anyway, I digress. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!